I had a request for more of a step-by-step style tutorial, and the portrait that I just did actually conforms pretty well to my typical processes, so I thought this would be a great candidate to do something like this. So I always start with an outline, and I'm trying to rough in shapes, and I use just kind of a mix of different browns, like umber, kind of a middle value and middle tone, thinned down with linseed oil. And I start to try to rough in shapes for my outline. And I try to do that less so with curves and round shapes, and more so, if I can, with kind of connecting lines a little bit. So just sort of piecing together kind of not just shapes, but proportional sizes as well. And I try to do that, everything in relation to everything else. So just roughing in roughly what this shape looks like compared to this shape. So once I've got the rough outline down, the next step is usually I try to keep with that middle tone, middle values, kind of getting darker colors down. I actually just got a brand new palette, and I've split the sides of the palette to a dark side and a lighter side. And so I just start blending together, sort of like I start with that darker side of the palette and get my raw umber, burnt umber, some different ultramarine blue, a little cadmium red, and sometimes a bit of titanium white to kind of sort of blunt the color a little bit. And I just sort of start mixing things together. I go a little heavier on the ultramarine blue when I'm trying to get shadowy areas, cooler tones, and then sometimes I'll touch that up instead with a little cadmium red. Sometimes I'll have a separate section for some yellower mixes, some dark yellow mixes. I usually lean on burnt umber and yellow ochre to try to get that more yellowish brown tone for darker zones. I have to be really careful though about mixing some of these colors on my palette, because I really don't usually want any green, and that's something that can obviously happen if you've got yellow ochre and ultramarine blue. Combining those two things is not something that I have to be very cautious of. So just sort of mixing those colors and getting the dark. As I build up those darker zones, you can kind of see on screen, sometimes I have to touch out the outline shape a little bit as I fill in blocks of color. You know, I've talked about this in other videos, how I try to think of these discrete zones of color, these blocks, a color mix. So like you just go piece by piece, you find a little block or a shape or a piece that is a certain color value, its lightness and darkness, and then sort of the blend, and just go through and find the matches. You're just kind of trying to piece where each of those little blocks makes sense. And that's something that I kind of, I've talked about this before too, I kind of work backwards in a sense. I'm sometimes not looking for the spot. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I look for the spot first and then do the blend, but sometimes I go the reverse way too. Like I'll just start blending and I'll get a nice color on my palette and I'll say, okay, where is this color? Where should this be? And I'll find everywhere where it should be on the painting. And my mind just kind of jumps back and forth between those things. Sometimes it's a matter of efficiency. Sometimes it's just what is comfortable, what works the best for me. But just going piece by piece in that way, I find is useful. So as you're blocking these in, typically go from darker to lighter. There are some examples of previous paintings where I haven't really done that. I've kind of jumped around or kind of betrayed my own process, but usually I go from darker to lighter. There's some spots though that, like on the side of the subject's neck, on her left side, the right side of the painting as you're looking at it, there are some bluer tones that are lighter blue. So those can be kind of tricky to judge sometimes, because I have a natural inclination to try to do those darks to lights and darks tend to be cooler and the lighter values tend to be warmer, but that's not always true. You do sometimes have darker, warm spots. And in the side of the subject's neck here, some brighter, cool spots. Those things definitely happen. So sometimes I have to force my brain to make sure to get those spots too, to try to really make this as complete as I can. So in the spot that the video here is in now, I have started to build out some more of those lighter spots. And I don't always do this right. There's always a risk of over blending on the painting surface. That's when you start to muddy things up and you start to lose those discrete zones of color. So I have to be very cautious to not overblend. Layer those shapes and let them exist as they are. So if I do it right and I go dark and then lighter, 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 and eventually get to an almost white, I find building that dark to light gives you some three-dimensional kind of views or aspects to it. It adds depth to the painting it gives a really nice effect, I think. Another thing to talk about, which I'm kind of touching it up right now, the eyes of this subject. So I always start the eyes similarly to the overall painting in that it's mostly raw umber. I get the dark shapes of the eyes in place, and then I get an actual black. And it's a black that I blend myself. So I'll get ultramarine blue and raw umber and mix those up. Sometimes I like it a little bluer, sometimes not. But then I start adding gradually some titanium white and just kind of touch it lighter and lighter until you get an effect of shine into the eyes. And that's what you can see, I think, in this step of the painting, where the kind of center, the part of the curve of the eye that's closest to you is a little brighter, but it's still not white. And I think that's a key, something that I had to learn over time is, the eye shouldn't be white unless you have a super bright light right in the subject's face. The eye should be tones of gray, or maybe it has some red in it, even some yellow. There's some subtleties to those color blends. So those are the eyes. So I've proceeded on past that, and I've kind of filled in the starting point for the hair. The hair is a really exciting part of the painting for me, but it's a two-step process. So what we've done so far is I put the base part of the hair in, and I'm gonna move on, and then we'll finish it up when we do the background, which is kind of fun, because then that's when you get to kind of blend the background into the subject's hair. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So what I've moved on to in the video, though, is kind of working on the clothes. This is stepwise. This is pretty consistent for me. I fill in usually the skin tones first, hit the eyes, some of the facial features, base hair, then I get to the clothes. So here it's kind of the same process, putting in zones of color. This had a little tricky part to it in that the subject's sleeves were kind of semi-transparent. I think maybe sheer, is that the word? But semi-transparent, you can kind of see through in a way. So that was kind of a challenge, actually. I don't have a whole lot of experience with that. So I just kind of did some basic colors in the main part of the shirt or dress or whatever this is. And then I put down some base colors of skin kind of in the center part, and then layered on some blue. And I had to be very careful here to not mix it, to really explicitly not mix it on the painting surface, and just kind of layer discreetly and leave it alone. That was, I think, the key for that semi-transparent. And then kind of touch off some where the shine of the light would hit the fabric. So that was kind of fun, kind of tricky though too. So now the next part. So we're getting to the background. And this is something that is pretty fun to me, as I mentioned. For a long time, I kind of neglected backgrounds, but I've really made it an emphasis over the last year to do more interesting backgrounds, and I found that they're actually pretty fun now, because what this gives you the opportunity to do is, so you have the base of the hair, as I mentioned before, and then you get to kind of blend that background into the hair and kind of give some soft edges. It really lets you do some of the most fun parts of Alla Prima painting. And I haven't really talked much about that in this video, but this is all in one session. So Alla Prima is direct painting, it's wet on wet painting, all in one session typically, or at least all in one day, where you do not give the paint time to dry. And you just, everything gets done where you can mix the paint together as you need to. As I said, there's kind of some nuance to it in that you don't want to overblend, because then you end up with a muddy mess. But if you do it right, you kind of pick and choose where you're blending and where you're not blending. And so here, we kind of bring the background, which this is kind of a fun color. It's kind of a little bit of alizarin crimson, some ultramarine blue, titanium white, kind of giving us a subtle purple, a bluish purple. You bring that background right up to the edge of where you put the hair and where you put the subject itself, and then you bring it right up to the edge, and then you can come back and go over the hair again and get those strands of hair to flow down, which is pretty fun. I find that to be a very satisfying part of painting. Another thing about this one, so I really tried to, and this is something I don't have a lot of experience with, reflection. So behind the subject is, I think it's supposed to be a door, like with not mirrored glass, but reflective glass, that I wanted to have a little of the kind of purplish color shining on it, but I also wanted to kind of get the effect of glass, or make it kind of seem like glass. So as I said, I don't have a lot of experience with that, so kind of tricky, but that I think is one of the great things about painting is, and really just creating art in general, is the experimentation part of it. And here in the video, I think if I have this synced up right, you can see I'm kind of blending in the hair into the background now. So that's that fun part of it that I mentioned, and it's something that I always look forward to in these pieces. Any piece that I do, that's a gratifying part of it. So, and I do wait until the end. You don't have to wait until the end for that. Obviously, you can do that anytime you want to, but for me, I like to bring that until the end because it brings the whole thing together for me. And as I said, it's a really rewarding part of the painting. So, and the last step, again, if we're looking dark to light, the last step would be just kind of touching off some shine in different places, coming back and getting some details, but just kind of getting those fine-tuned aspects down. And usually that involves kind of touching off some dark spots too, where maybe I lost some of the dark effect, like on the side of the nose where it kind of connects with the eyes. That's a part that sometimes loses some definition as you work. So sometimes I have to come back and get that, as well as the mouth. So going back to what I was saying about the reflection and kind of trying to do glass here. So I figured, kind of just trust your eyes and what you see, try to connect that. So what I saw here was like in a lot of darkness in the glass. And there's some greenery that's being reflected, and I also wanted some reflection from that purple. Maybe the door is kind of tilted or at a bit of an angle, so you're seeing some reflection there. So I wanted to capture that aspect, and I think I was able to. I don't know if what I paint always makes logical sense. I hope that it does. I think it does. I try to trust my eyes, even though probably they deceive me sometimes. I think that's unavoidable, but one of the most difficult parts about learning painting, I think, is training your eyes to see things the right way that makes sense for a painting. So like trying to see those specific identifiable blocks and zones of color, that's hard. So I hope this step-by-step walkthrough was useful. I hope it was actually step-by-step. I know I kind of bounced around a little bit, but I did try to make it as sequential as possible. And again, this is a pretty good example of kind of my typical painting. So thank you for watching this. I hope it was useful again, and I hope I see you for the next painting.